Welcome to Lesson 3, where we look at the European legal and governance context. In the previous lesson, we looked at what makes data identifiable in practice: direct identifiers, indirect identifiers, uniqueness, and re-identification risk. This lesson places those practical ideas in a wider European legal and governance context. To see why these publication decisions matter institutionally, it helps to start with what this lesson is about and what it is not. This lesson is not legal advice, and it does not replace a formal legal or GDPR assessment. Its purpose is to help teams understand the logic behind responsible publication, when personal data remains in scope, when anonymized data may fall outside that scope, and why publication decisions should be reviewed, documented, and approved. A good place to begin is the basic question: when does GDPR apply and when does it not? This first part focuses on the relationship between GDPR, personal data, pseudonymization, and anonymization. The aim is not to turn this into a legal deep dive, but to give teams a clear and usable understanding of the basic distinction. The central point is that GDPR applies to personal data, but not to data that is truly anonymous. Under GDPR, the key issue is whether data relates to an identified or identifiable natural person. Recital 26 explains that identifiability should be assessed in light of all means reasonably likely to be used, including singling out. That is why removing names alone is not enough. If people can still be identified directly or indirectly, the data may still be personal data. If data is truly anonymous, GDPR no longer applies to that released dataset. That makes it especially important to bring back distinguishing anonymization from pseudonymization from Lesson 1. Established in Lesson 1, this is one of the most important distinctions, not only in this course, but also in open data practice. Pseudonymization can be a valuable safeguard, but it does not automatically make data anonymous. The European Data Protection Board reinforced in their guideline from January 2025 on pseudonymization that pseudonymization is a protective measure under GDPR, not an exit from GDPR. Anonymization is different. The goal is that individuals are no longer identifiable at all in the released data, meaning that there are no options to reverse or circumvent the anonymization. After distinguishing personal, pseudonymized, and anonymized data, teams need a practical way to apply that distinction. The key question is not whether the dataset looks anonymous, but whether people could still be identified by means reasonably likely to be used. If identifiability remains, the dataset should not simply be treated as open data. It should go through the appropriate legal, data protection, and governance review before any publication decision can be made. Once this GDPR logic is clear, we can place it within the wider European open data policy context. Is to widen the lens. Open data is not only a technical or local administrative issue. It is also part of a broader European policy agenda around reuse, innovation, transparency, and digital public value. That policy context explains why public sector bodies are encouraged to share data in the first place. Let us first look at why open data plays such an important role in the European policy context. At the European level, open data is closely connected to broader public goals. It is intended to make institutions more transparent, support innovation, and create value for research, the economy, and society, like we've already established in the beginning. When public sector information becomes easier to access and reuse, it can help citizens, companies, researchers, and administrations develop new insights and services. But open data is also about fairness. If public information is made available under clear and accessible conditions, more actors can benefit from it. Not only large organizations with strong resources, but also smaller initiatives, researchers, journalists, and civil society. So in the European context, open data is promoted because it can strengthen accountability, enable reuse, and support more inclusive data ecosystems. However, this does not mean that all data should simply be published without limits. Open data and data protection are not opposing ideas, but they must be considered together. Even when openness is encouraged, personal data still requires protection. The fact that a dataset may be useful or publicly relevant does not automatically mean that it is safe to release. Before publication, organizations need to assess whether individuals could be identified directly or indirectly. And this is important because anonymization is not always straightforward. Data which appears harmless on its own may become sensitive when combined with other sources, like we've seen in Lesson 2. In some cases, reducing the level of detail, aggregating the data, restricting access, or deciding not to publish at all may be more responsible choice. So the key message here is that open by default does not mean publish everything. It means that openness should be considered as a starting point, but always within the boundaries of data protection, risk assessment, and responsible governance. Once these risks have been assessed, the next step is to choose the appropriate way of making data available. Not every dataset requires the same publication mode. If the risks are low and the data is safe to release, full, open publication may be appropriate. If more detailed information could create identification risks, aggregated publication may offer a better balance between usefulness and protection. In other cases, restricted access can be a suitable option. This allows valuable reuse, for example, for research or public interest analysis, while still limiting who can access the data and under what conditions. And if the risks cannot be responsibly reduced, then non-publication must also remain an option. This shows that responsible open data is not about choosing between openness and protection. It is about finding the right level of openness for the specific context, the specific data set, and the possible consequences of reuse. In this final part of the lesson, the focus shifts from rules and policy to organizational responsibility. Responsible publication is not only about understanding concepts, it is also about making decisions, recording reasoning, and assigning clear roles. One practical way to see that is to ask what can happen when anonymization is not handled properly. When publication decisions go wrong, the consequences are not only legal or administrative. A public body may face scrutiny, complaints, or the need to withdraw data. Just as importantly, individuals or groups may be exposed to stigma, unwanted disclosure, or other forms of harm. Public trust can be difficult to rebuild once sensitive information is seen as having been released carelessly. This is why anonymization should never be treated as a one-person technical task. In practice, anonymization decisions should not sit with one person working in isolation either. Public bodies need clear roles, review steps, and documented reasoning before release. Depending on the organization, that may involve data owners or domain experts, data stewards, and open data coordinators. legal or data protection colleagues, IT or security teams, and management approval. The goal is not bureaucracy for its own sake. The goal is responsible judgment and a defendable publication process. Once responsibilities are shared, the next question is how teams make these decisions in practice. This is a useful checkpoint for public bodies and project teams. Before publishing, the question is not only, can we upload this file, but also, what are we publishing? Who reviewed it? What risks remain? And is open release actually the right choice? These questions bring legal logic and governance practice together. And that brings us to the key lessons from this section. This lesson showed that responsible publication sits at the intersection of law, policy, and governance. Open data is encouraged because it creates public value, but that does not remove the need to protect rights and assess identifiability carefully. It has also showed that publication decisions should be reviewed and documented, not improvised. The next lesson turns to another practical layer of this work: data security basics for open data teams.